Milkweed, Chapter 25. There were no longer bows in Janina's hair or socks on her feet. The straps on her shoes were broken and flapped when she walked. The shoes had become muddy scraps. Side note, the shoes are kind of a metaphor for her life. They were shiny and bright in the beginning to show how rich they were, and now they're muddy and scrappy to show their conditions now. For a while I tried to shine them with spit, but the mud was too much. The best reflection I had ever seen of myself disappeared with the shine of her shoes. Janina cried a lot now, and she kicked and she screamed, and sometimes she screamed at her mother, "Mama, Mama, make me a pickled egg. Make me one, please, make me." She loved pickled eggs more than anything, she said, but her mother only lay with her back to the room on the mattress in the corner. And as much as Janina cried, she laughed too. But she didn't just laugh, she howled, especially when I told her that Himmler looked like Uncle Shepsel. We were sitting on the floor picking each other's lice at the time, and Uncle Shepsel had just said, "You look like monkeys." And I had whispered to Janina, "Himmler looks like Uncle Shepsel." And Janina burst out laughing so hard she fell backwards and knocked her head on the floor, and lice flew from her hair. And the head knock really hurt, and Janina didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So she did both. One day, Janina ran to me in the courtyard. "I found the cow," she screamed, and she grabbed my hand and we ran, and she led me to a bombed-out ice cream shop. 2 walls were still standing, and one of them hung a tilting picture of a cow. She often played such tricks on me. Once, she tricked me into lending her my yellow stone necklace. She wore it for days, and when I asked her for it back, she threw it over the wall. I couldn't believe it. I was so mad. I threw the bag of gifts she had left on the steps for me over the wall. She threw my cap over the wall. She had brought one toy animal with her from the other side, a blue and gold stuffed pig. She hid it, I found it, and I threw it over the wall. She said no more. She said even though I threw away her things, she was going to give me something new. I believed her because I felt bad for what I had done. She said the new gift was already under my coat bed. That's what they sleep on, a pile of coats now. I looked. It was a bone of a rat. She liked to goad me into chasing her, and whether I did or not, she always ran, and if I didn't chase her, she would stop and thumb her nose at me and call me Fishy Mishi. I didn't have to be goaded the time she leaned out the window above me, and she dropped a raw turnip on my head. I picked the turnip out of the dirt, I put it in my pocket, and I took off after her. When I caught her, I shook her and I told her never to treat food that way. Side note, he was mad that he had disrespected the food, not that she had hurt him. That's how valuable food is at this point. All she did was laugh, so I rubbed the dirty turnip in her face, and I shook her harder, and the harder I shook her, the louder she laughed. I became so used to her noise, her chattering, her whining, her pestering, her laughing, her crying, that my ear went on hearing it even when it stopped. All during one particular day, I sensed that something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I didn't know it was the absence of Janina. I barely heard her all day. I barely saw her. That night, as usual, most activity came to a stop. The light bulb was always dark now. The electricity never came on anymore. The end of the day's light was the end of ours. There were no more knocks on the door for Mr. Milgram's pills and potions. There weren't any more. Uncle Shepsel put away his book on how to become a Lutheran. And Mrs. Milgram did not have to stop whatever she was doing because she did nothing to begin with. All day, all night, she just lay on the mattress with her back to us. She moved only when she coughed. Side note, it sounds like Mrs. Milgram has typhus. Usually, Janina continued to play pick-up sticks in the dark by fingertip feel until her father said, Janina! And she would stop and lie down on the overcoat next to me. But on this night, she was already on her coat when I lay down. I slept with my new family almost every night now. Mr. Milgram always said good night to us, first to Janina, then to me. I always looked forward to that moment, as no one had ever said good night to me before. And on this night when he said, "Good night, Janina," there was just silence. And as usual, I waited until I heard everyone sleeping. It pleased me to do this, because I would like to pretend in my mind that if anybody heard me going out, they would stop me and I would be forbidden. So I got up and I crept out from the room. I did this nearly every night. I tiptoed down the stairs and into the moonlit courtyard and out into the street. My instinct was to be bold and uncatchable, but I enjoyed being sneaky too. The streets looked deserted, but I knew they were not as deserted as they appeared. I knew that somewhere along the wall, Big Heinrich stood tall. He stood as tall as he could with Kuba on his shoulders, and Kuba was draping 2 thick coats across the barbed wire and hauling himself over and down the other side, and then tossing over the wall the rope that Big Heinrich would winch him back with. I knew that beneath my feet in the sewers, where daylight never fell on the rats and the rivers of poop, I knew that Enos and Faraday and one-armed Olek were creeping towards the wall, puffing on Faraday's cigars to give themselves points of light and to smoke over the stink. I knew they all wished they could come with me. They wished they could fit through the 2-brick space. As for Yuri, who knew? He was somewhere doing something. I darted from one shadow to another until I was across the street from the wall. I stood in the shadow of a doorway. The night glowed beyond the barbed wire. Sounds floated over from the other side. A clink, a tinkle, a voice, a wisp of music. And I leaned out to watch for flops on patrol. Someone was standing in the moonlight, just an arm's length away from me. I couldn't believe it. "Janina!" "I followed you." She was grinning, and I yanked her into the doorway. "Go back," I said. "No." "Go back, Janina." "No, I'm going with you." Her eyes were 2 drops of moonlight. "You're not little enough," I said stupidly. I'm littler than you." "I'm not taking you, Janina." "You have to. You're my big brother." That stopped me for a moment and gave me all the more reason not to allow her. "No." "Yes." I smacked her in the face, and the moon drops wobbled. She smacked me back, and that was that. I dashed across the street to the wall, and in a moment I was through the 2-brick space on the bottom of the wall and onto the other side. A moment later, she came squirting through the hole. Chapter 26. She stood gaping. "The rest of the city! It's still here!" I ran to her and I pulled the armband from her sleeve and I stuffed it into her coat pocket. I did the same with my own. "See, you made me forget, Janina." I stomped off. It was not good to be seen near the wall, and I took the sidewalks, and I heard her footsteps behind me. I walked fast, and maybe I couldn't stop her from following me, but I had no intention of making her a full partner in this smuggling game. Soon we were among the people, the source of the voices and the sounds that came drifting over the wall. In the ghetto, everything was gray. The people were gray. The sounds were gray. The smells were even gray. Here, on the other side, there were colors. Everything was a color. The red clang of the streetcar. The music was blue. The silver laughter of people, and in the distance the toodles of the merry-go-round were a swirl of colors. And whenever I came through the wall, I wanted to do nothing but just walk the streets. And I remembered Yuri's words, "Don't look guilty." I swaggered down the sidewalk, and I headed straight for the other pedestrians, and I made them move out of my way. I whistled. In other words, I ignored Yuri's other commands about not calling attention to yourself and being invisible. Or maybe I heeded his warnings a little bit. I resisted the temptation to put the blue and white armband back on my arm. I was proud to be part of the Milgram family. I was proud to be a Jew. I wanted to wave my armband and shout out, "Hey everyone, look at me! I'm a Jew! I'm a filthy son of Abraham!" But I didn't. I heard Janina whistling behind me, and I went to my favorite place. It was a hotel. It was a hotel where the jackboots stayed. Jackboots ate food there and drank beer there and slept there. A blue neon sign in the shape of a camel blinked off and on above a revolving door, and I did what I always did. I went straight in the revolving door and around and right back outside again. And Janina did it too, but she didn't stop after once around. Then I jerked her away. I went around back, and garbage cans as tall as me were lined up like soldiers, and as usual, the lids to the garbage cans were off, and several children were poking through the stench and the maggots of the garbage. They were too busy to notice me, and the hatch door leading to the food cellar of the hotel, it was locked as usual. There were several windows at ground level, and there were steel bars in front of the glass. I knelt before one of the windows, and I pushed it open. I took off my coat and I tossed it inside. I turned myself sideways, and I squeezed between two of the bars. That's how tiny he is. And I dropped headfirst into the dimly lit cellar. I thought nothing of it. I lived in the cracks of a world made for large, slow people. I was small, tiny, and quick. And as I was bending over my coat, Janina's coat hit me in the rump, and she came tumbling down in a flurry of underwear. "Ow!" she squawked. "Be quiet, Janina. You should have stayed home." I pulled the sack from my pocket and unfolded it. "What's that for?" she asked. "It's for food." "I don't have a sack." "Well, that's too bad." "Where are the pickled eggs, Misha?" "They don't have any of those here. Not that I would have known a pickled egg if I saw one." She swept a large coffee can from a shelf. Psh! It came crashing to the floor, and I balled my fist in her face. "Stop it! They're going to hear, Janina." She grabbed her chin at me. "I don't like you." "I don't like you, Janina." "Good," she said, and she stomped off among the shelves searching for pickled eggs, and I began making my rounds. There was one problem with the Blue Camel Hotel food cellar. Most of the food was in cans and jars that were too big and too heavy to carry a long way. So I concentrated on smaller things. There were wooden bins of onions and lettuces and turnips and cabbages, and there were boxes of soda crackers and stacks of loaves of brown and black bread. There were gray, ancient dried fish and jellies and potatoes sprouting wigs of grass. I avoided the cold locker of fresh meats because we didn't have a way to cook anything. But shriveled clubs of sausage, oh, they were perfect. I filled my sack and I headed for my treat. Although the jars of fruits and vegetables were too big to carry, who was to say I could not help myself to them right there in the food cellar? I pulled out from a dusty corner my personal jar of peaches in syrup. The jar was almost as big around as me. I unscrewed the lid and I grabbed a peach. "What's that?" came Janina's voice at my shoulder. "What does it look like?" I stuffed the peach into my mouth. "I want one." She reached and I smacked her hand. "No, they're mine." She balled her fists and leaned back and screamed, "I'm hungry!" I grabbed another peach and I stuffed it into her mouth. "Here!" I quick closed the jar and shoved it back just as the door opened and light flooded from above down into the cellar. Footsteps came partway down the stairway and stopped, and a voice said, "Hello! Hello!" We crouched by the fruit jars. our cheeks bulging, peach juice streaming from our chins. "Hello!" At last the footsteps went away and the door closed, and I pushed a crate under the window and I climbed onto it. I shoved the stuffed sack and then myself through the bars, and even standing there on the crate, Janina could not reach, so I had to help haul her out too. Going back, I lugging the sack over my shoulder, we stayed in the shadows and in the alleyways until the final dash across the moonlight to the 2-brick space and on to the other side, back into the ghetto. Another dash across the moonlight and back into the shadows. I headed for the orphanage. Dr. Korchak always left a window unlocked in the back. I opened it up and I dumped in half of the contents of my sack. "What are you doing?" asked Janina. "I'm feeding the orphans." "You're supposed to feed us." I was tired of her complaining. "I feed whoever I want to feed." I slammed the window